Welcome to Lace 'em Up Media, and in the first of many videos in our series, we'll be going over the history of political parties. It's an in-depth look at short-lived, obscure, or now-defunct political organizations from across the United States who left their mark on America's political system. Today, the subject of our first video will be centering on the Free Soil Party. The United States was dealing with a number of problems by the mid-19th century, with one of the biggest being the practice of slavery and its potential expansion into the Western territories. Of the many political parties that tried to tackle the issue of slavery, perhaps the most well-known would have to be the Free Soil Party. A coalition comprised of various strands of the anti-slavery movement, including Northern Democrats who were referred to as barn burners, while Northern members of the Whig Party were called conscious Whigs. Along with members of the already existing anti-slavery Liberty Party, the Free Soilers were created out of necessity as America's victory in the Mexican-American War saw them acquire a few southwestern states and the state of California. This is important to mention as these newly acquired states could tip the balance when it comes to the amount of states that were pro- or anti-slavery. In 1848, the two major political parties, the Democrats and the Whigs, were hoping to downplay the issue of slavery in order to cool off simmering tensions within each party's northern and southern wings. By the 1848 presidential election, the Whigs chose Military General Zachary Taylor as their nominee while the Democrats went with Michigan Senator and career politician Lewis Cass. Both Cass and Taylor seemed apathetic to the anti-slavery cause, with Taylor himself being a slave owner, whilst Cass favored the concept of popular sovereignty, which allowed citizens to vote and decide if slavery should be allowed in a state or not. The Free Soilers all supported the Wilmot Proviso, a failed proposal to ban the introduction of slavery into new territories won in the Mexican-American War. Around 20,000 delegates from 19 states gathered in Buffalo, New York in August 1848. Notable attendees include future presidential nominee Samuel J. Tilden, poet and journalist Walt Whitman, and abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass. Although often labeled a single-issue party, the Free Soilers had other policy agendas like a tariff to reduce national debt, infrastructure spending, and a homestead law to encourage farming in the new Western territories. The platform was drafted by former Attorney General Benjamin Franklin Butler and future Supreme Court Justice Salmon P. Chase. The party's slogan was, "Free soil, free speech, free labor, free men." That said, it should be noted their motives were occasionally startling, bigoted, and racist. Historian Kenneth Stamp notes how the party had its fair share of negrophobes who wanted to prevent black competition to white laborers and wanted to keep the racial purity of the states. Indeed, the party bolted at the idea of black suffrage. As Stamp notes, they were less anti-slavery than anti-black. Comprised of a big tent of political party members, the convention was given the tricky task of finding a universally acceptable nominee. Several Whigs supported Supreme Court Justice John McLean for the nomination, whilst members of the anti-slavery Liberty Party coalesced around New Hampshire Senator John P. Hale. However, the largest faction in the Free Soil Party were the anti-slavery New York barn burners, who had walked out of the Democratic Convention. The barn burners emerged victorious when it came to getting former U.S. President and co-founder of the Democrats, Martin Van Buren, as their candidate for president. The convention chose Charles Francis Adams, grandson of John Adams and son of John Quincy Adams, as Van Buren's running mate in order to pacify the Whig contingent. One might say it was a Democrat, running with a Whig, standing on a liberty plank. Although a high-profile public figure, the former president was a surprising and contentious choice as Van Buren had been the Democratic Party's de facto leader by 1844, but his opposition to annexing Texas as a slave state led to Southern opposition and made the two-thirds needed for nomination an impossibility. In 1848, Van Buren was again a prominent figure for the party's nomination but walked out after the convention by splitting the New York votes between the anti-slavery barn burners and the pro-slavery section known as the Hunkers. While Van Buren may have won the Free Soil nomination thanks to his supporters, his back catalog was not that of a typical anti-slavery politician. For example, he had previously opposed the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia, and he also took an anti-slavery stance in the 1841 Supreme Court case United States v. Amistad. One biographer best described Martin Van Buren as having a typical mid-19th century Democrat stance on slavery. There has been much debate about whether Van Buren was really committed to the Free Soil movement or if he was fueled by spite at the party that rebuffed him. The Free Soil campaign can be summarized by one of the party's pamphlets in that election. It described the two major party candidates as a Northern man with Southern principles and a Southern man with Southern principles, who were both utterly unworthy of the suffrage of a free people. They too had national support from anti-suffrage paper The National Era. Uncle Tom's Cabin, the seminal work of Free Soiler Harriet Beecher Stowe, was first published in the National Era. The party was also supported by a number of prominent female newspaper editors, Jane Gray Swisshelm of the Pittsburgh Saturday Visitor and Clarina Nichols of the Brattleboro Windham Country Democrat. Their cause was tempered, however, by anti-slavery forces sticking with their party affiliations. For instance, noted young abolitionist Abraham Lincoln stayed true to the Whig Party and stumped for Zachary Taylor, whilst Van Buren loyalist Thomas Hart Benton held firm for the Democrats. Although the party failed to win any electoral votes in the election, this does not tell the whole story. The party won over 10% of the popular vote, the strongest performance by a third-party candidate in U.S. history up to that point. Their support base came from the North, where they captured 14.4% of the vote. The Free Soil Party performed best in Vermont, where they won a 28.5% share of the vote. However, they perhaps had the most impact in one of the two states where they finished second, which was New York, where Van Buren neared a 120,000-strong vote tally in his home state. This was done in order to siphon off votes from Lewis Cass, who would have won both the state and the election had Van Buren's vote gone to him. In the words of author William de Gregorio, Van Buren's candidacy fatally handicapped Cass's run for the presidency. Despite what it may appear on first glance, it was a huge step forward for the anti-slavery cause, and with both Free State Whigs and Democrats vying to stake their claim as pro-free soil, the issue was now, in the words of conscience Whig William Seward, at length a respectable element in politics. 1848 also saw the Free Soil Party gain a foothold in Congress after winning seats in the Senate, the House of Representatives, as well as a few special elections. Although only winning 9 of the 117 House seats, no party won an overall majority, meaning Free Soilers held the balance of power in the chamber and could thus wield influence. As such, the election for a House Speaker dragged for 3 weeks with 63 ballots as parties failed to negotiate a new gavel holder. This might seem like a promising start for the new organization, but in reality it was the high point of the party's influence. Indeed, from here on out, the party went into a gradual decline due to a number of factors. The acclaimed Civil War and Reconstructionist historian Eric Foner notes how most of the Free Soil Party's work after 1848 was done by the more autonomous state parties, diminishing its impact. Another factor that took the wind out of the Free Soil Party was the passage of the Compromise of 1850, a bipartisan effort led by Whig Henry Clay and Democrat Stephen Douglas in an attempt to settle the slavery issue. Prominent Free Soilers such as Chase, Hale, and Democrat Charles Sumner led the revolt against the compromise, even if, in the eyes of the public, it managed to quell a contentious issue, at least for another decade. By the 1850 midterms, the party was pushed into 5th place in the House of Representatives behind the newly formed Union and Southern rights parties. They lost over half of their seats in the House, including losing all representation in one of their stronger states, New York, with their popular vote total plummeting from 237,000 to 82,000. When the 1852 presidential election came around, the group nominated party founder John P. Hale as their candidate, even though the man himself reportedly didn't want to run. After being encouraged to do so by fellow party founder Salmon Chase, Hale accepted the nomination with George Washington Julian, a U.S. representative from Indiana, was selected as his running mate. The convention this time was more radical than 4 years previously, calling slavery a sin against God and a crime against man. However, by this point, the party was waning as a national outfit. As former VP nominee Charles Francis Adams remarked, the party's moral tone never was more thoroughly broken. Further hindering their effort was the fact that many anti-slavery Whigs like William Seward ended up backing Whig Party candidate Winfield Scott. On the other side, you had Martin Van Buren supporting a dark horse candidate for the Democrats in Franklin Pierce. Much like the previous election, the Free Soilers were pigeonholed into 3rd place, but unlike in 1848, the results were absolutely dire. John Hale, like Van Buren in the previous election, didn't win any electoral votes, but even worse, he only picked up 4.9% of the popular vote, roughly half of the amount Van Buren had won in 1848. Adding to Hale's misfortune, he also lost re-election to his Senate seat when Democrats won the New Hampshire legislature in the state elections. A stake was driven through the heart of the party once more with 1854's Kansas-Nebraska Act, which saw pro- and anti-slavery forces engage in violent and bloody conflicts that have become known as Bleeding Kansas. It caused a seismic realignment in the U.S. political system, and not just for the Free Soil Party. In light of this and their dismal results in the 1852 election, future Vice President Henry Wilson, along with a few other politicians, declared the Whig Party dead, while famed journalist and future presidential candidate Horace Greeley called for the formation of a new Northern political party. By 1856, the Free Soilers had integrated alongside Northerners, conscience Whigs, and anti-Nebraska forces into the anti-slavery Republican Party, which would be in power by 1860 with the election of Abraham Lincoln. When the Civil War came to a close on April 9, 1865, the party would begin the process of ending slavery under the 13th Amendment, but it was much easier said than done, especially with Southern states passing Jim Crow policies that segregated against African Americans until the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Above all, the Free Soil Party's greatest historical impact would be raising the anti-slavery cause even before it was a major partisan political issue. Although their successes were limited, several people in the party would go on to have a great impact in the mid-20th century. On top of this, the Free Soil Party also laid the groundwork for the formation of the Republican Party who, in their early stages, made it a major focus in ridding slavery from the United States. For all of these reasons, the Free Soil Party can best be viewed as perhaps the most crucial third party in American history. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for new videos every day. Follow us on Bluesky Social and X for updates, and check out our website for articles on all things wrestling, film, and politics.